Okay, good. Say that. So up to Siman Lamed Base Nun. We're getting towards the end of this very, very long Siman. Says the Mechaba Sif Nun. Ein liknes gidim me eine Yehudi. You're not allowed to buy the sinews which we're going to stitch the Tefillin with from an eine Yehudi, from a non-Jewish person. Mishum dechashinon shem shel behemoth tmehem. We're worried that maybe the sinew will come from a behemoth tmeah. Says the Mechaba Makom she'en gidin mitzuyin. If you're in a place where gidin are not matzui, toifrin, and he's got a foreign word here, but tlaldrish sha'osim in a klaf actually is damnu lohem gidin. What you do is there's a practice you take away from the klaf, from the parchment, which is leather, and you make very thin strips of sinews from that, and you would do that. So if you play in a place where gidin are not matzuyim, then they would stitch it with this parchment, with a little strip of the parchment. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Sif Cotton Reish Chofhei. So you can't buy it from Ein Liknos Gidim Ein Yehudi. V'davka, says the Mishnah Berurah, V'davka kasher hoilech lebote hanochrim liknos mehem gidin. Davka, when you go to their houses to buy the gidin, the sinews, v'gam yodu aloi mixas min hanochrim hanoitin gidin mebehemet meh. And you know, it's also known that some of the nochrim, they buy gidin, or they make gidin from behemet meh. Lochein afal pisha arev noitlim mitahira. Even though the majority buy it from a tahira, or they make it from a behemoth tahira, kivan shehu haylech etz nochri, since you're going to the nochri b'shashem kavuin bebateim, when they've got a din of kavua, ein holchin acha haroiv. Why? Shekol kavua kamechza mechzadami. Every kavua, this nochri is in a house in his kavua, and therefore it's got a din of mechza, and therefore we'd say don't do it. But if he's coming to you, he's coming to the marketplace, then it's different. Then you're allowed to buy from him. I'm reading called the parish parish. That if he's being parish, he's actually leaving his house and he's coming to you. Then we apply the principle of called the parish, and then it's okay. Unless unless they actually, when they come to the shuk, they set up like a shop or something, and then you're chayze back to the kvi, and it's mechza mechza. So too says Mishnah Berurah, if it's not known. Some of these sellers get it from a behemoth meher. And then you would be allowed to buy it from them. Because the majority of gidin come from animals which are teres. And by the way, remember we've said that it doesn't have to be a shchut, it doesn't have to be a shechted animal, even if it's an avela or treifa. So long as it's a kosher min, then it's okay. That's only true with gidin which are not tova, which are not spun. Our begidin tevuyim, which are processed and are spun properly. Das Mogen Avram, the Osa Liknes Mehem. The Mogen Avram is of the opinion that it's Osa to buy from them. Afilu hu yodeh shehem behemoth tahira. Even if they know it's from a behemoth tahira. Shekiven hu halacha l'Moshe Sinai tzorich shetiyah asiyosan lishma. The asiyah has to be lishma of making these gidin. The tzvias hagidin zuhi asiyosan. That's the making of it. The Nochrim lav b'nei lishma ninhu. Nochrim have not got a status of lishma. They can't make something lishma. They just question whether at all you need tvir lishma for the gidin. Okay. Now says the Mechaba that in a place where you haven't got gidin, they would make it out of the klaf itself. Says the Mishnah Berurah Reish Chavov, heim chutin hanasim in a klaf. They would make thin strips, strands from the klaf of mak matchak sfirelei. Given the minahu, since but the evet it's considered min, it's part of an animal at least. Kagidin atzman, it's as if it's part of the gidin. Or ksherim litvar bohem sefer Torah tefillin and mezuzos. Achi is dam. Then you can use this until you get the hold of the proper stuff. Says the Mishnah Berurah Reish Chav Zayin, kadesh lo lisbatel mitzvah tefillin. They shouldn't, abandon the mitzvah of tefillin. Or chashi is damin lo gidim yatirim v'yitvar begidim. And when you get hold of proper gidim, then you undo the stitching and you restitch it. They say that even b'shas hatchak is no good. Shari halacha l'Moshe Sinai hu gidin. The halacha l'Moshe Sinai is gidin. You've got to use gidin. V'hatludus arhu shel klaf. And this tludus that the Mechaba talks about is it's not gidin, and it's because it comes from the klaf. Va'ir l'tfira lo shamanu. And who's ever heard of using to stitch the tefillin? Well, and therefore, if he's got no other gidim, I'll call upon him lo yivarach aleihem. Certainly, you should make a bracha on them. V'chein b'nei me'ayim dakim, and so too, b'nei me'ayim dakim. If you're using very thin leather from the material from the b'nei me'ayim, the intestines of the animal, v'yaveshim, and it's very dry. Kamin chutin shel gidim, ein lit for bohem. Don't use that. The halach al Moshe Messina who to call dafka gidim, because the halach al Moshe Messina is you've got to use gidim. Oyed kalsu she'ein lit for begidei oif tahar. Don't use the gidim of a kosher oif. Ki mi yachria ezemehem karu gidim, because it's not clear what's called gidim. Ve'ezemehem chutin, and what's called chutin. Ve'ezemehem veridin, which like sinews and things like that. Ve'einom gidin, ve'anon gidin binan, and we need gidin and not other things. Okay, good. That's the end of Reish of Simon of Sif Nun. Sif Nun Aleph. Says the Mechaba, Yitfer Shleisha Tfiras. Now, here we go. You've got to stitch 3 stitches. So if you take a look at the back of the tefillin here, you can see each side has 3 stitches. Can you see that? That's one stitch, that's a second stitch, and that's a third stitch. So in total, you've got 12. Right? So says the Mechaba Nun Aleph, Yitfer Shleisha Tfiras b'chol tzad. You stitch 3 stitches on each side of the tefillin. V'chut hatfira yesoviv mishtei ruchos. That means that the chut hatfira goes through. So can you see the tefillin? It goes. The sofa takes the stitch and it goes all the way through, down to the other side. Right? So that's what it means. So says the Mechaba, v'chut hatfira yesoviv mishtei ruchos. It goes through from the side of the bias down through the Torah. V'yavir chut hatfira bein kol bias for bias, and it goes through every bias. Now, if you look, Eli, in your one on page 222, if you're here, it's got a very good picture. It goes through, like I said, but he stitches from the bottom through each of the batim, across, and then back again. So I don't know if you can see that, but that's this picture over here, right? In other words, on the tefillin itself, the sofa would put the stitch through that side, and then it would go up, it would go through the bias, and then across. Can you remember the sharosh is 4 compartments? It would go across from this section into the next section, and then back out again. So it goes through each bias. So it says that's what the Mechaba means. V'yavir chut hatfira bein kol bias for bias. Says the Ramah, miu im lo osarak yud tfiras. If you didn't do 12 tfiras here, so for example, let's say this one, you did, instead of doing 1 and then through and then out again and do 3 on each side, he did 2, right? Or he did less than that. Says the Ramah, miu im lo osarak yud tfiras. He only did 10. So he did 2 on one side and 2 on the other side, and then 3 on 3, for example. Even less than that, ein and nifsa, that does not puzzle the tefillin. V'yesh mi she'omer sheyud beis tfiras elu yu b'chut echot. But you should try and use one string to do all the tfiras for these 12. Says the Mishnah Berurah, b'chol tzad. Tam yud beis tfiras. The reason why we have 12 stitches in the tefillin is neged yud beis shiftei Yisrael, corresponds to the 12 shvatim. V'lo bo'in tfira toicha batim milmato. We don't have to do the. Sorry, I missed the line. V'lo bo'in tfira toicha bayis rak somach lebayis. It doesn't have to be toicha bayis. It needs to be somach lebayis. So this, can you see this over here, is called somach lebayis. This, it's very close to the bias, and there's actually a little section which goes underneath the bias, this is called somach lebayis. So says the Mishnah Berurah, it needs to be somach lebayis. Ve'ein tofim b'toifa gidim b'sfas habeged b'lisho. You don't do it like when you stitch some clothes without leaving any hem. You leave a little bit minatitera chutz lehatfira, which is a bit beyond the tfira. V'tzarich she'ar habatim milmato lepiv you got the v'sorich she'er habatim, the of the batim, underneath it, until it comes to the other side, the holes of where the tefira is. So if you take a look He's got a picture of this. This is number 3. So I don't know if you can quite see this, but if this is the bias, right? And there's a little section, like a border going around the bias, and then you've got the actual box, the titera. So you stitch through, when you put this together and then you put the titera around it, you put it together and you're stitching through the bias, this little border around the bias, in the titera. Yeah, you can have a look at this after share if you want. But in other words, on the shalosh, you can't. It's all closed up, so you can't see it. But under the bias, there's a little sort of a border around it, and then you've got the titera, which is the body of this whole thing, and then you stitch through the little border which is connected to the bias through the titera. That's what it means. Kadesh Yitfer Arabatim, called Arabatim means the little box, the little section which is attached to the bias. Mikol Sad Imatitera, which is the wider bit. Veloka sofrim hamakatzrin shelabatim, and not like those sofrim who shorten the shelabatim, the leather around the batim. She'ein over holo tachas nikve hatfira ve'in nitveres klalim hatfira. They don't tie it with a titera. Rak shemahadkin abayis b'tocha urba shel titera. They just stick it on. V'habaruch she'oma, which is a sefer kosov, she'posel kama tefillin machmazeh. He has puzzled many tefillin which are like this. And it's tzorich nitve yachat ha'ur shelabatim matitera. Like I explained, the little bit of on the bias itself, you stitch through that, and you stitch together with the titera to connect the two, and you don't just stick it on. Okay, good. Mishtei ruchais. This is Reish Chavtes. So Reish Chavtes is going on the end of the mechaba. Mishtei ruchais. So, like I explained, it's going through. You're stitching through from the top end through to the base over there. So says the Mishnah Berurah Reish Chavtes, Mishtei Ruchas Rotzolema, Shekol Hatzfira Yehi Mesuveves Mishnei Tzdadim Ponim Va'achar. Ponim Va'achar is on either side. It goes through from the top, and you're going through right to the bottom. The Nimtz is Tofresh Mishtei Mechatin, Achatz Yotze La'achar V'achas Nechneches L'Sad Pnim. One goes on the inside, one goes on the outside. So it's all the way through from the top to the bottom. Reish Lamed. So this is going on the Ramah. That you do if you only did 10 tefiras, then it's okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'chein im lo her v'chut hatfira ein ma'akev b'diavad. If you didn't bring the chut through, then b'diavad is not ma'akev. Ein la b'simen k'pesif cotton reish zayin. B'chut echad. Ideally, you should use one string for the whole thing. Reish lamed aleph. Im nifsak. If it breaks, what happens if you're stitching and you're halfway through and the thread breaks? Yesh erm diyochel kosher. You can tie a new piece of string to attach it. V'yesh erm yitlenu. You actually should remove it. Kuloi misham v'yachsa v'yitva mechodesh b'chut acher, and start again with one chut. Shekim shenifsak b'shas hatfira nikasha chut kodesh. Not that it's inherently problematic to use two, but it's just a siman that this chut is very weak and it's going to snap again. And it's going to snap further. It's no good. But if the chut you were using from the outset is just short, then it's not going to break again. Everyone agrees you can tie another thing onto it, to finish off the stitching. The Prima Godim writes, if you haven't got any other gidim, if you've got no other chutin, then you can be soimech on the opinion which says you can tie another piece of chut to continue the stitching. This is all only true if it snaps in the middle of you stitching. But if it snaps afterwards, ayin lekamon siman lamed gimel sif beis, the Mishnah will get there. Okay, we'll leave it there. Good chodesh.